When did we truly become human? Was it when our ancestors first stood upright on the African plains, staring at the horizon with curious eyes? Was it when we tamed fire, that flickering, unpredictable spirit that turned night into day? Or was it when we first buried our dead, whispering prayers to a sky we could not understand? Somewhere in the vast, tangled web of prehistory, there came a moment, or perhaps a series of moments, when something changed. The creature that hunted and gathered began to dream. The animal that fought for survival began to paint. And in the flicker of a campfire, the first spark of consciousness may have been born. But when did that happen? And how did a simple primate, with bones and blood like any other, awaken to the strange awareness of its own existence? Archaeologists have unearthed fragments of that transformation: stone tools, cave paintings, ancient skeletons with signs of compassion and ritual. Each discovery whispers a story, a clue to when intelligence became imagination and survival became meaning. Tonight we travel back, far beyond history, into the age before names, before nations, before memory itself. From the first Homo habilis shaping crude tools, to Homo erectus mastering fire, to Neanderthals singing to the wind and Homo sapiens carving symbols of gods. This is not just the story of evolution, it's the awakening of the mind, because somewhere along the way, the ape became aware of its soul. So, when did humans truly become human? Let's go back, to the dawn before dawn, where the answer may lie, not in fossils or stones, but in what they meant. To understand when humans truly became human, we must journey back millions of years, long before writing, before civilization, before even language as we know it. The story begins in Africa, around 6 to 7 million years ago, with creatures like Sahelanthropus chadensis. It was one of the earliest known hominins, an ape-like being that could perhaps walk upright for short distances. Its skull hints at a creature standing at the edge of two worlds, one foot in the forest, one in the future. From there, the evolutionary path was not straight. It twisted through countless dead ends, species that thrived for a time, then vanished. Among them were Australopithecus afarensis, the species of the famous skeleton Lucy. Lucy lived over 3 million years ago. She was small with long arms for climbing and short legs for walking. But she walked upright, and that simple act changed everything. Standing freed her hands, and those hands began to shape. Fast forward to 2.5 million years ago, and the first true tool makers appeared, Homo habilis. Their name means handyman. With sharp-edged stones, they cut meat, cracked bones, and crafted the first technology in human history. That was more than survival. It was intention. A stone shaped for a purpose marks the dawn of mind. Then came Homo erectus, a species that spread beyond Africa, reaching Asia and Europe. They were taller, stronger, and perhaps the first to master fire. Imagine their world. Dark forests filled with predators, lightning splitting the sky, and then, one night, a fallen branch begins to burn. Others would run, but they stayed. They studied the flame, fed it, feared it, yet depended on it. Fire became a friend, a guardian, a god. Archaeological evidence from sites like Wonderwork Cave in South Africa, dating to almost 1 million years ago, shows traces of controlled fire, ashes, burned bones, and hearths. This discovery is one of the oldest signs of human mastery over nature's most dangerous force. But the leap from intelligence to imagination came much later. Around 300,000 years ago, a new species emerged, Homo sapiens, us. Their fossils, found in Morocco's Jebel Irhoud, look surprisingly modern. But what truly set them apart was not their bones. It was their minds. At this time, other human species also walked the earth. Neanderthals in Europe, Denisovans in Asia, Homo floresiensis on distant islands. Each evolved differently, yet all shared one remarkable quality: the beginnings of symbolic thought. In caves across Europe, we find evidence of art. The walls of Chauvet, Lascaux, and Altamira explode with images of lions, horses, and bison, painted 30,000 to 40,000 years ago. But even older than these are simpler carvings, abstract patterns etched into stone and bone over 70,000 years ago in Africa's Blombos Cave. These markings had no survival function. They didn't feed or shelter anyone. They were expressions, symbols. And that's where the mystery deepens. Because when a being begins to create meaning, when it shapes symbols that represent thoughts, it crosses a threshold. It begins to think about thinking. Burial sites reveal another side of this awakening. In Shanidar Cave, Iraq, archaeologists found a Neanderthal burial sprinkled with pollen, perhaps flowers placed by other Neanderthals. Another body, a man with a withered arm and a blind eye, lived for years, cared for by his companions. Compassion, empathy, ritual. These are not instincts of animals. They are the first glimmers of humanity. And yet Homo sapiens soon surpassed them all. We began weaving complex societies, telling stories, making tools that evolved faster than biology could keep up. By 50,000 years ago, during what scientists call the cognitive revolution, something extraordinary happened. Our ancestors began creating figurines, like the Lion Man of Hohenstein-Stadel, carved from mammoth ivory over 40,000 years ago. A human body with a lion's head, a being that does not exist. To imagine what is not real is to be fully human. Archaeologists, anthropologists, and geneticists all debate why this revolution occurred. Some say it was a genetic mutation in the brain, sparking symbolic language. Others say it was social complexity, that we needed storytelling to unite larger tribes. And still others suggest it was something spiritual, the awakening of self-awareness, the first question of why. By this time, Neanderthals were disappearing. Homo sapiens spread across the planet, from Africa to Europe, Asia, and finally to the distant lands of Australia and the Americas. Everywhere they went, they left behind a trail of innovation: fishing hooks, sewing needles, ornaments, musical instruments. Consider this: a flute made from a vulture bone found in Germany, over 40,000 years old. The creature that once hunted for meat now made music. From the first chipped stone to the first melody, from ashes to art, from firelight to faith, the story of becoming human is not one of survival alone. It's the slow ignition of consciousness. By the time the Ice Age reached its peak, humans had already built symbolic worlds in their minds. They feared death, dreamed of gods, and told stories that reached across generations. And maybe that's the answer we're looking for. Becoming human was not a single moment, but a mosaic of small awakenings. Each fire lit, each symbol carved, each tear shed for the dead was a spark that built the mind of humanity. But that raises another question. If becoming human was a gradual process, what was the true trigger? What force or event caused an animal to become aware of its own mortality and begin to search for meaning beyond survival? That's where our journey leads next, into the heart of the mystery. When intelligence met imagination, and the first thought of "I am" was born. The awakening of mind, fire, fear, and the birth of meaning. Imagine the Ice Age night, a vast frozen plain under a black sky pierced with stars. The wind howls through the bones of mammoths and the hollows of caves. Somewhere in that darkness, a small band of early humans huddle around a fragile flame. The fire dances. Its light flickers across their faces, faces like ours, yet still carrying the shadow of the wild. In that glow, something unseen is happening. They are not just warming themselves, they are watching. The flame captivates them, its movement, its life, its mystery. And for the first time, a creature of Earth begins to wonder. This, perhaps, is where the human story truly begins, not in the bones or the tools, but in the moment of awareness. The fire becomes a mirror for the mind. It represents transformation, from chaos to control, from darkness to vision. Through fire, humans learned not just to survive, but to create. They cooked food, protected themselves, and forged new forms of life around the hearth. Yet the real revolution was mental, because to control fire is to glimpse the power of the gods. In ancient myths, fire is almost always divine. Prometheus stole it from Olympus. The Sand Bushmen tell of a mantis who stole fire from ostriches. The Aboriginal Dreamtime speaks of ancestral beings who first brought flame to the world. Across cultures, fire was never just a tool. It was the spark of consciousness itself. Archaeologists may point to the earliest evidence: burned stones in Wonderwork Cave, hearths in Gesher Beno Yaakov, or ash deposits from Zhoukudian in China. But the truth transcends data. Because what truly changed was not the fire itself, but the relationship between the human mind and the world around it. For the first time, humans began to see patterns, to connect cause and effect, to anticipate, to plan. This was the dawn of abstract thought, the ability to imagine something that doesn't yet exist. From that seed of imagination came everything that defines us. The hunter who stalked prey began to visualize the hunt before it happened. The gatherer who stored food began to think ahead, preparing for a future unseen. And when night fell, they told stories, shadows on cave walls, gestures and grunts that slowly evolved into language. Speech didn't appear suddenly. It grew from rhythm and sound, from shared memory. Early Homo sapiens might have first used sound to signal danger or emotion, but over time, these became symbols. A symbol is something miraculous, a sound that represents an idea. That's what separates instinct from imagination. And once humans had words, even primitive ones, they could pass down knowledge. Fire's secret could be shared. The shape of a spear could be taught. A song could carry memory across generations. This is when culture was born. But there's another layer to becoming human: the awakening of emotion. Compassion, grief, love. These are not survival instincts. They are signs of depth. Archaeologists studying the Neanderthal burial at Shanidar found a skeleton of a man who had been disabled for most of his life. He was blind in one eye, missing part of his arm, and crippled, yet he lived for decades. He could not have survived alone. His tribe must have fed him, protected him, and carried him when he could not walk. That act of care, invisible in fossils, yet present in the bones, speaks volumes. It tells us that even before modern humans, the human heart was already awake. As groups grew larger, they began to share rituals. Some of the earliest known sites, like Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, suggest that communal gathering and spirituality came before agriculture, not after. It's as if the need to connect, to belong to something greater than oneself, was the original human drive. In those early rituals, around fire and stone, humans looked upward, toward the stars. They began to ask questions that no animal had ever asked. Where did we come from? Why do we die? What lies beyond the dark? Such questions are the essence of humanity. They mark the birth of philosophy, long before any written word. Let's imagine one of those moments. A young hunter returning from the plains finds a fallen companion, lifeless, still. He doesn't yet know the word death, but he feels the weight of absence, a presence that has vanished. He covers the body with leaves. He looks to the sky, searching for something unseen. In that moment, without language or theology, he performs the first ritual. Not because it feeds or protects him, but because something deep within whispers, "This mattered." And that whisper, that recognition of meaning beyond survival, is the true beginning of being human. We often think of evolution as bones and genes. But perhaps the greatest leap wasn't in the skull or the spine. It was in the unseen, in the emergence of conscious experience, the ability to not only live, but to know that we are living. That's why so many scientists, philosophers, and mystics say the birth of humanity wasn't biological. It was psychological, even spiritual. Homo habilis built tools. Homo erectus mastered fire. Neanderthals buried their dead. But Homo sapiens began to ask why. By 40,000 years ago, the cave walls of Europe had become sacred canvases. The handprints on those walls, stenciled in red ochre, were declarations of existence. They said, "I am here." They were early forms of identity, of art, of selfhood. To press a hand against stone was to bridge the physical and the eternal, a gesture that said, "Though I will die, something of me will remain." This perhaps is the clearest sign of when we became truly human, not when we first spoke, or built, or hunted, but when we looked into the void and chose to leave a mark. The story of humanity, then, is not just a story of survival. It's a story of meaning, and meaning is what turns an animal into a person, a life into a legacy. But there's still more to uncover. Because as our minds expanded, so did our questions. What if there was more to this awakening, not just brain evolution, but a deeper cosmic trigger? Did something in our world, or beyond it, spark consciousness itself? That's the question scientists and philosophers are still debating today. And to explore that mystery, we must look deeper, into the strange theories that blur the line between science, myth, and the unknown. The Great Mystery. What triggered human consciousness? If becoming human was not a single event, then what caused it? Was it simply the slow march of evolution, neurons multiplying, brains growing? Or was there something extraordinary that science still struggles to explain? For decades, scientists have searched for that invisible spark, the moment of awareness when thought turned inward and the universe began to look back at itself through human eyes. 1. The brain's quantum leap. One theory holds that consciousness arose from sheer complexity. As brains grew larger and neural networks more intricate, new patterns emerged. Homo erectus had a brain roughly 900 cubic centimeters in volume. Neanderthals and early Homo sapiens reached 1,500, even slightly larger than ours today. But size alone wasn't enough. Something in structure and connection changed. Archaeologists note a sudden explosion of creativity. Art, music, tools, trade, around 50,000 years ago, known as the Upper Paleolithic Revolution. Why then? Some researchers, like evolutionary psychologist Stephen Mython, argue that the human mind became modularly integrated, meaning once separate domains like tool-making, social bonding, and symbolic thought began to fuse. In other words, the same brain that imagined a spear could also imagine a story. And from that fusion came the birth of metaphor, the ability to see one thing as another. A stick became a weapon, a flame became a spirit, a shadow became a god. When the mind could imagine the unseen, the age of myth began. 2. The language explosion. But another school of thought says the true awakening came with language. Language didn't just let humans communicate, it allowed them to think in symbols. Every word is a bridge between sound and meaning, a way of encoding thought so it can travel across minds. Before language, knowledge died with each generation. After language, it could live forever. Linguist Derek Bickerton called this the dawn of displaced reference, the ability to talk about things not present, the past, the future, the invisible. Once we could speak of gods, dreams, and death, our inner world expanded infinitely. Language became a mirror of consciousness, and the birth of storytelling was the birth of humanity's shared imagination. It's no coincidence that around this same time, the first cave art appeared. Art and language are siblings, both born from the need to make the invisible visible. 3. The social brain theory. There's also the argument that we became human together. Anthropologists like Robin Dunbar suggest that consciousness evolved as a tool for social survival. In complex tribes, individuals needed to predict others' thoughts, read emotions, remember alliances, and navigate hierarchies. Those who could empathize and/or deceive survived longer. In this view, the mind evolved not in isolation, but in conversation. We learned to reflect on ourselves because we had to understand others. That's why, even today, self-awareness and empathy are inseparable. To be human is to recognize the self in another's eyes. 4. The mystical hypothesis. But then there are ideas that reach beyond science. Some researchers, and many philosophers, suggest that consciousness is not something created by the brain, but something the brain tunes into, like a receiver picking up a signal. This view, often called panpsychism or cosmic consciousness, proposes that awareness is a fundamental property of the universe, woven into the fabric of reality itself. If so, then humanity didn't invent consciousness. We merely became aware of it. Ancient civilizations echoed this intuition long before modern science. The Egyptians spoke of the Ka, the life force that connects all beings. Indian Vedic texts described Atman, the self that is one with the cosmic Brahman, and Plato, thousands of years later, claimed that knowledge was remembering, awakening to truths the soul already knew. Perhaps then the birth of humanity was less a biological event, and more a spiritual recognition. The moment we looked at the stars and realized we are made of the same thing. 5. The contact theories, a cosmic provocation. And then there are the radical theories, ones that question whether our leap to self-awareness was entirely natural. Writers like Terence McKenna proposed the stoned ape hypothesis, that early humans consuming psychoactive mushrooms experienced expanded consciousness, unlocking language, creativity, and spirituality. Others speculate that ancient humans may have encountered forces or beings that altered their perception forever. From the myths of sky gods descending to Earth, to the Sumerian tales of the Anunnaki, to the strange carvings found at Göbekli Tepe depicting celestial patterns, these stories hint at something more. Could our awakening have been guided? Mainstream science remains skeptical, but even so, the question lingers. Why did our minds open so suddenly, as if something flipped a switch? No other species, not even our closest relatives, made that same leap. Chimpanzees can use tools, dolphins can communicate, elephants mourn their dead, but none have built temples to the stars. It's as though in us, the universe developed a new kind of mirror, one capable of seeing itself. 6. The burden of awareness. But with that awakening came something terrible too, the knowledge of death. To be conscious is to know we will die. No animal fears time like we do. And from that fear came religion, philosophy, art, our endless attempts to make sense of the inevitable. The philosopher Ernest Becker called it the denial of death, the driving force behind civilization itself. We build, we write, we love, we fight, all to create something that outlives us. So when did humans truly become human? Perhaps when we first realized we wouldn't last forever, and began the desperate, beautiful work of leaving something behind. 7. The dual nature of humanity. From that awareness came both light and darkness. The same intelligence that painted the caves also created war. The same imagination that birthed gods also forged weapons. We learned to dream, but also to destroy. Our evolution was not just physical, it was moral. Every step forward in understanding brought new choices, to heal or to harm, to love or to dominate. The story of humanity is the story of a species torn between its divine potential and its animal past. We are, as Carl Jung said, the ape with a god's mind. 8. The unanswered question. And so, the question remains open. Did consciousness arise from matter, or did matter awaken to consciousness? Science can trace our bones and our genes, but not our dreams. Archaeology can uncover the shape of our tools, but not the birth of thought. We can measure the age of a skull, but not the moment a creature first asked, "Who am I?" Perhaps that moment is still unfolding. Perhaps humanity is still becoming human. Because every generation that asks these questions, every child that looks at the stars with wonder, continues the same journey that began 1,000,000 years ago around a flickering fire. The mystery is not ancient. It's alive in us, right now. The lessons hidden in our origins. So what does all this mean for us today? Why does it matter when or how our ancestors became human? Because the story of our awakening isn't just buried in fossils or written on cave walls, it's still unfolding inside every one of us. 1. The echo of the first fire. When you stare into a flame, you are seeing the same light that once mesmerized our ancestors. That flicker of warmth, that pull of mystery. It's the same ancient force that taught early humans to imagine, to wonder, to hope. In a way, every screen we stare at today, every glowing device in the dark, is an echo of that first fire. It connects us, comforts us, but also distracts us. Just as the first humans learned to master flame, we now must learn to master our own creations, technology, power, knowledge. If we fail to control them, they will control us. And that's a lesson as old as humanity itself. Fire gave us light, but it could also burn. Knowledge gave us civilization, but it could also destroy. The question that shaped our ancestors still shapes us. Can we balance intelligence with wisdom? 2. Compassion as an ancient power. When we look at the fossils of a crippled Neanderthal cared for by his tribe, or the graves filled with offerings for the dead, we see something profound, that empathy is not modern, it is prehistoric. Long before religion told us to love one another, our species already knew the value of care. It was compassion, not strength, that ensured our survival. Think about it. The ones who shared food, who helped the sick, who worked together, they built communities. Those who lived only for themselves vanished into the dust. Every civilization, every moral code, every spiritual path that came after was built upon that same ancient truth. To be human is to care. In a world today that often feels divided by nations, beliefs, or screens, remembering that truth might be our most important act of survival yet. 3. The courage to ask, why? Our ancestors could have lived as animals, eat, sleep, reproduce, die. But something within them rebelled against the simple cycle. They looked at the stars and asked questions. That curiosity is our birthright. It's what led to art, science, philosophy, to rockets, medicine, and the internet. And yet, in our modern comfort, we often forget how sacred that question truly is. We scroll through endless answers, but rarely stop to wonder. The moment we stop asking why about the world, about ourselves, we risk becoming less human, because what made us human was not fire or tools or even words. It was the hunger to understand. 4. The fear that made us wise. With consciousness came fear. Fear of the dark, fear of death, fear of the unknown. But fear was not our enemy. It was our teacher. It pushed us to invent, to build, to protect. We carved shelters, made weapons, and told stories to keep our courage alive. Today, our fears have changed. the collapse of ecosystems, the rise of artificial intelligence, the loneliness of a digital age, but the lesson remains the same. Fear can destroy us, or it can evolve us. The difference lies in whether we face it together or alone. 5. The mirror of the ancients. When you look at ancient cave paintings, those handprints pressed against the stone, realize that those were the first selfies, the first expression of identity, the first I am. We have always sought to leave our mark, from ochre hands on rock to names etched into metal to digital footprints across cyberspace. But maybe the question isn't how much we leave behind. It's what we choose to leave. Are we leaving beauty, knowledge, hope, or only noise and destruction? The ancestors who painted bison and stars weren't trying to be remembered. They were trying to connect. They reached out to the future, to us. And now, it's our turn to reach forward to those who will come after. Because the story of being human isn't finished. We are the next brushstroke on that same wall. 6. Rediscovering the sacred in the ordinary. When we read about ancient rituals, it's tempting to think our ancestors were primitive. But what if they simply saw more than we do? To them, every river was alive, every mountain sacred, every sunrise a message from the divine. They lived in constant dialogue with the universe. Today, in our age of data and steel, we risk forgetting that the sacred is not gone, only hidden. It still lives in the rhythm of the ocean, in the birth of a child, in the silence between thoughts. Becoming human was never just about intelligence. It was about awakening to connection, to nature, to others, to ourselves. Perhaps the final step of our evolution is not technological but spiritual. To remember what we once knew when we were still barefoot beneath the stars. 7. The future of the human story. If the journey of becoming human began with fire and ends with artificial intelligence, what does that mean for us? Are we nearing another leap, another cognitive revolution? Will machines inherit our consciousness, or are we simply extending our own? Perhaps what we call technology is just our newest form of reflection, our way of projecting thought into matter. Just as the first cave painter used ochre to leave a message, we now use circuits and code. But the real question is, will our creations carry our humanity or erase it? If we forget the compassion, curiosity, and humility that made us human, then we risk becoming clever animals once more. Brilliant, but soulless. Yet if we remember those ancient lessons, if we use our power to heal, to connect, to wonder, then the next step of evolution might not be a fall, but a transcendence. 8. The living archaeology of the soul. Archaeology digs through the earth to find bones and artifacts. But there is another kind of archaeology, one of the mind. Every time we reflect on our fears, our loves, our dreams, we are excavating the layers of our own humanity. The same questions that haunted the first humans still whisper in our hearts. Who are we? Why are we here? What happens when we die? Each generation must rediscover those questions for itself, because to forget them is to forget what it means to be alive. So when did humans truly become human? Maybe the better question is, are we still becoming human now? Every act of kindness, every invention, every work of art continues the same story that began in a cave, under the flickering light of fire. We are still learning to see, to feel, to understand, still reaching from darkness toward meaning. That is the journey of our species. That is what it means to be human. The endless journey of becoming human. We began this journey with a question. When did humans truly become human? And now, after walking through millions of years of evolution, through ashes and bones, through firelight and myth, the answer feels both simple and impossible. There was no single moment, no one dawn, no switch that flipped. Becoming human was not an event. It was, and still is, an unfolding. Somewhere, long ago, a small ape stood up and looked around. It saw danger, but it also saw beauty. It saw the stars reflected in a puddle. It felt fear and wonder. That was the first spark. From that spark came everything: language, art, love, war, gods, dreams. Every age since has only added new layers to the same story, a story of a creature that looked at chaos and began to make meaning. We have uncovered the fossils of our ancestors, bones that tell us how we walked, but not why. We have decoded the genome of Homo sapiens, yet we still can't explain why a handful of dust decided to question the stars. Perhaps we never will. Perhaps the mystery of our awakening is not meant to be solved, but felt. Because being human is not defined by what we know, but by what we seek. It's the endless pursuit of truth, of love, of beauty, of belonging. Every question we ask is a continuation of that first question whispered in the dark. Who am I? Think about it. We have built skyscrapers that pierce the clouds, machines that can think, telescopes that see into the past of the universe itself, and yet we still cry at music, we still stare at sunsets in silence, we still bury our dead and tell stories to our children. Those are not instincts, they are echoes of the very first humans, who painted walls with meaning, who sang around firelight, who dreamed of eternity even as they faced extinction. In their eyes, we still exist, and in ours, they live again. So when did we become human? Maybe when we first learned to love. Maybe when we first felt guilt. Maybe when we realized that we are both animal and God, fragile yet infinite. To be human is to live between two worlds, the physical and the spiritual, the mortal and the eternal, the known and the unknowable. We are stardust that became aware of itself. We are the universe dreaming of its own origin. And that beautiful, impossible paradox is what makes us human. As we stand now on the edge of a new age, one where artificial intelligence, genetic engineering, and interplanetary travel redefine what it means to be us, we must ask again, will we remember the lessons of our past? The fire that gave us light can also burn the world. The mind that invented art can also invent extinction. The question is no longer when we became human, but whether we will stay that way. Because to be truly human is not about flesh or DNA. It's about choice. The choice to think, to feel, to connect, to create meaning, even when the universe gives us none. So tonight, as you finish this video, imagine those ancient faces by the fire. They are not strangers. They are you. Their questions are your questions. Their fears, your fears. Their dreams, still burning in your blood. And when you look at the stars, the same stars they saw tens of thousands of years ago, remember this: we are still evolving. Not in our bones, but in our souls, still learning what it means to be human, still reaching for the light beyond the dark. So tell me, when do you think humans truly became human? Was it with fire, with love, with language, or is that transformation still happening, right now, within us? Let me know in the comments. And if this journey through time stirred something in you, a spark of curiosity, a whisper of wonder, then don't forget to like, subscribe, and join me again on the next exploration into the forgotten history of our kind. Because the story of humanity is far from over. It's just begun.